"How dare you touch that piano with those hands?" Eleanor's voice cut through the room like ice, silencing the party guests. Sylvia froze, her fingers hovering above the keys of the expensive Steinway. The wealthy woman's face was twisted with disgust as she stared at her maid. But why was the famous pianist smiling? What did he know that Eleanor didn't? What happens when talent and dignity face off against privilege and prejudice? When someone who's been invisible suddenly can't be ignored? This incredible story will leave you questioning everything about how we judge others based on their job titles rather than their true abilities. Don't miss a single moment of this powerful journey. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Eleanor Mansfield stood at the grand bay window of her living room, manicured fingers tapping impatiently on the crystal glass in her hand. At 38, she was the very picture of affluence, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer outfit immaculate, her presence commanding respect and deference from everyone who entered her world. "Sylvia," she called sharply, not bothering to turn around. "I believe I mentioned the fingerprints on the mirrors in the East Wing yesterday. They're still there." From the doorway, Sylvia Jackson nodded silently. At 46, her dark skin had weathered years of hard work, yet she carried herself with quiet dignity. "Yes, Mrs. Mansfield. I'll see to it right away." The Mansfield estate sprawled across 3 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood in town. 5 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a pool house, gardens meticulously maintained by a team of landscapers, and Eleanor's pride and joy, a Steinway grand piano that dominated the main salon. The piano gleamed under careful lighting, positioned to be the first thing guests noticed when entering the main entertaining space. "And remember, Mr. Mansfield's business associates are coming for dinner tonight. Everything must be perfect." Eleanor's tone left no room for negotiation. "Especially the salon. The piano needs special attention, no dust, Sylvia. Not a speck." "Of course, Mrs. Mansfield," Sylvia replied, her voice even. 3 years of employment in the Mansfield household had taught her the value of invisibility. Do your job, stay out of the way, and above all, respect the boundaries. As Sylvia quietly exited to continue her work, Eleanor checked her reflection in one of the many mirrors dotting the mansion's walls. She adjusted a strand of hair and smiled with satisfaction. The daughter of old money who had married into new money, Eleanor Mansfield had crafted a life that many envied but few were permitted to truly enter. The piano caught her eye as she passed through the salon. Eleanor ran her fingers possessively over its polished surface. She had learned to play as a child, a requisite accomplishment for a girl of her standing, but rarely touched it now. Still, it represented something important: culture, refinement, the things that separated her world from those who served it. "It needs to be tuned before the charity gala next month," she murmured to herself, making a mental note to call the specialist who was the only person she trusted with her precious instrument. From the hallway, Sylvia watched Eleanor's reverent treatment of the piano, her expression carefully neutral. Then she turned away, pushing her cleaning cart toward the East Wing mirrors, her strong hands that held secrets Eleanor Mansfield couldn't begin to imagine, gripping the handle tightly as she walked away. The bus lurched to a stop 3 blocks from Sylvia's modest 2-bedroom apartment. Her feet ached after the 12-hour workday, but she walked briskly, eager to shed the invisible weight that always seemed to cling to her shoulders after a day at the Mansfield estate. Her apartment sat on the 2nd floor of an aging complex, nothing fancy, but clean and well-kept. Sylvia unlocked the door and smiled at the familiar scent of home, a mix of the lavender air freshener she favored and the lingering aroma of this morning's coffee. "Marcus," she called, setting down her purse on the small table by the door. No answer. Her son must be at his night class. At 20, Marcus was her pride and joy, bright, determined, and working his way through community college while holding down a part-time job. Sylvia moved to the corner of the living room where an upright piano stood, not a Steinway like Eleanor's, but a well-loved instrument she'd purchased second-hand years ago. Her fingers trailed over the keys without pressing them, a habit born of years of discipline and practice. 28 years ago, Sylvia Jackson had been a promising young pianist at Juilliard, her talent earning her a partial scholarship. The daughter of a postal worker and a nurse, she had embraced the opportunity with fierce determination, practicing until her fingers cramped. But in her second year, when her father suffered a debilitating stroke and her mother couldn't manage alone, Sylvia had made the choice that seemed inevitable: family before dreams. She sat now on the worn bench and opened a book of Chopin's nocturnes, her eyes scanning the familiar notes. After a moment's hesitation, she began to play, her strong fingers moving with a grace and precision that would have shocked Eleanor Mansfield had she witnessed it. The music filled the small apartment, transforming it. For these moments, Sylvia wasn't a maid, she was an artist again, interpreting the complex emotions of Chopin with a depth born of her own life experiences. A key turned in the lock, and Sylvia's hand stilled on the keys. "Mom." "That sounded amazing," Marcus said, dropping his backpack by the door. Tall and lean like his father had been, Marcus shared Sylvia's warm brown eyes and determination. "Just keeping the rust off," she smiled, closing the music book. "How was class?" "Professor thinks I should apply for that music program scholarship. Says my compositions are showing real promise." Marcus mimicked his teacher's formal tone, but pride shone in his eyes. "That's wonderful, baby." Sylvia stood and hugged him tightly. "Your talent deserves to be recognized." Later, after a simple dinner, Sylvia sat at their small kitchen table reviewing bills. The Mansfields paid well, better than most employers, but Marcus's tuition and their living expenses kept their budget tight. A flyer for piano tuning caught her eye, and she stared at it thoughtfully. Years ago, she'd taken certification courses in piano maintenance and tuning, practical skills she'd thought might supplement her income as a performer. Now, it was just another unused qualification, another part of herself she kept hidden away while dusting someone else's piano. One day, she whispered to herself, a habit from years of deferred dreams. One day. 15 years of marriage deserves more than just dinner, Richard, Eleanor insisted, pacing the length of her husband's home office. The Whitmores had acrobats at their anniversary. Actual Cirque du Soleil performers. Richard Mansfield, a practical man who had built his software company from scratch, sighed behind his desk. "And you want to outdo them with a symphony orchestra in our living room?" Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Not a full orchestra. Just a string quartet for dinner, then Jeffrey Winston for the after-dinner entertainment." She watched her husband's expression carefully. "Yes, that Jeffrey Winston. The pianist who played for the president last year." Richard's eyebrows rose. "He must cost a fortune." "He does," Eleanor confirmed with a triumphant smile. "But he's also a client of Charlotte's husband," and she pulled some strings. "It's confirmed for next Saturday. Along with the 50 other guests." 50. Richard looked alarmed. "Ellie, I thought we agreed on an intimate gathering." "This is intimate," Eleanor protested. "I've only invited the essential people, the board members, key clients, the Whitmores, of course. We can't exclude them after attending their circus performance, and a few social connections that could benefit you." She approached his desk, resting her manicured hands on its polished surface. "Trust me, darling. Everyone will be talking about this for months." As Richard reluctantly nodded, Eleanor's mind was already racing through her mental checklist. "I need to speak with the caterers about the menu changes. And Sylvia will need extra help this week. The house must be immaculate." Throughout the week, the Mansfield estate transformed into a hive of activity. Extra staff were brought in under Sylvia's supervision, florists arranging elaborate centerpieces, specialty cleaners for the chandeliers, caterers planning an 8-course meal. "Sylvia," Eleanor called, finding her head maid organizing linens in the dining room. "Jeffrey Winston will need a private space before his performance. We'll use the library, but it needs to be perfect. And someone will need to check if the piano requires any special attention before his arrival." Sylvia nodded, making notes. "Yes, Mrs. Mansfield." I can arrange for a piano technician to come tomorrow. No, Eleanor said sharply. No outside technicians. Mr. Winston is sending his own person the morning of the event. I just need you to make sure the room is prepared and the piano is dust-free. She hesitated. And Sylvia, I've hired additional servers for the event, but I'll need you to oversee everything. You understand our standards better than some temporary help would. Of course, Sylvia replied, recognizing both the compliment and the expectation of extra hours without additional compensation. That evening, as Sylvia carefully polished the Steinway, her thoughts drifted to Marcus. His scholarship application was due the day after the anniversary party, and she'd promised to review his personal statement. Another late night, she realized, but worth it if it meant her son might have the opportunities she had once relinquished. The piano gleamed under her careful ministrations. Her trained eye noticed a slight unevenness in one of the keys, B-flat, second octave. Nothing that would affect casual playing, but a concert pianist like Jeffrey Winston would notice immediately. She made a mental note to mention it to the technician when they arrived. You're still here. Eleanor's voice came from the doorway, startling Sylvia slightly. Just finishing up, Mrs. Mansfield. Your piano will be perfect for Mr. Winston. Eleanor approached, her silk loungewear rustling softly. It was my grandmother's, you know. One of the few things I insisted on bringing from my parents' home when I married Richard. For a brief moment, her polished veneer softened. I used to play. Did you enjoy it? Sylvia asked, carefully keeping her tone conversational. The moment of vulnerability vanished, replaced by Eleanor's usual brisk manner. It was expected. Like tennis and French. She ran her hand over the piano's surface. Lock up when you leave, Sylvia. And remember, I need you here early on Saturday. 6 a.m. The flowers arrive at 7. As Eleanor left, Sylvia closed the piano lid with gentle precision, her fingers lingering just a moment too long on the polished wood. 20 years since she'd played on a Steinway of this caliber. The temptation to open it again, to test that uneven B-flat key, was almost overwhelming. But some boundaries weren't worth crossing, she reminded herself. Not with the anniversary party approaching and tensions already running high. She gathered her cleaning supplies and turned off the lights, leaving the Steinway waiting silently in the darkness. Dawn broke over the Mansfield estate, painting the manicured lawns with golden light. By 5:45 a.m., Sylvia was already walking up the curved driveway, her practical shoes crunching on the gravel. She'd slept barely 4 hours, staying up to help Marcus refine his scholarship essay until well past midnight. Good morning, Mrs. Jackson, called the security guard at the gate, one of the few people who addressed her with any formality. Sylvia smiled warmly in return. Small courtesies mattered in a world where she was often invisible. The house was silent as she used her key to enter through the service door. Eleanor wouldn't be awake for at least another hour, giving Sylvia precious time to prepare without constant oversight. She moved efficiently through her morning routine, checking that all was in order before the army of vendors descended. At precisely 7, the florist's truck arrived, followed in quick succession by the caterers, the lighting specialists, and the additional serving staff. Sylvia directed them with quiet authority, her clipboard becoming the command center for the day's operations. The roses go in the main salon, near the piano but not too close, she instructed the florist's assistants. Mrs. Mansfield specifically requested no pollen-heavy flowers near the instrument. By 9, Eleanor emerged, already dressed in silk loungewear, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Her critical eye scanned each room as she passed. The ice sculpture needs to be centered exactly, Sylvia, she said, gesturing to the massive crystal swan that had just been delivered. And tell the caterers I want to taste the sauce for the second course again. It was too tart yesterday. Yes, Mrs. Mansfield, Sylvia replied, making notes while simultaneously directing 2 workers who were struggling with a heavy mirror. And where is Jeffrey Winston's technician? He should have been here by now. Eleanor's voice carried the edge that Sylvia recognized as gathering anxiety. His flight was delayed, Mrs. Mansfield. The agency called to say he'll be here by 11. Sylvia kept her tone calm, knowing that Eleanor's stress would only escalate as the day progressed. 11. That's cutting it far too close. Eleanor paced the length of the salon, her fingers nervously adjusting objects that needed no adjustment. This piano needs to be perfect. Jeffrey Winston has played for royalty, Sylvia. Royalty. I understand. I've prepared the library as his warm-up room, and I've made sure the piano has been kept at a consistent temperature and humidity all week. Eleanor paused, momentarily surprised by this attention to detail. Good. That's good thinking. The compliment seemed to slip out unwillingly. As the morning progressed, controlled chaos enveloped the mansion. Staff bustled about, caterers shouted orders in the kitchen, and Eleanor's voice rose increasingly often above the din, correcting, adjusting, demanding perfection. At 11:30, with no sign of the piano technician, Eleanor's composure began to crack. Call again, she demanded, her knuckles white around her phone. This is unacceptable. The guests arrive in 6 hours, and Jeffrey Winston will be here for a sound check at 4. Sylvia made the call, her face carefully neutral as she received the news. Mrs. Mansfield, his connecting flight was cancelled due to weather. They're sending a local substitute, but he can't be here until 2. Eleanor's face paled beneath her perfect makeup. 2. That's impossible. This is a disaster. Her voice rose, drawing attention from nearby staff. Do they have any idea what's at stake here? My reputation? Richard's business connections? Sylvia watched as Eleanor's anxiety transformed into barely controlled fury. She knew what would come next, someone would need to bear the brunt of this frustration. Today, it seemed, that person would be her. By 4 o'clock, the Mansfield mansion hummed with the energy of final preparations. The replacement piano technician had come and gone, pronouncing the Steinway in excellent condition after his adjustments. Eleanor, dressed now in a shimmering silver gown that had cost more than Sylvia's annual salary, directed last-minute details with military precision. The lighting is still too harsh on the east side of the room, she instructed the technician. And tell the caterers to chill the champagne precisely at 4:30, not a minute before or after. Sylvia moved efficiently through the background, invisible yet essential, ensuring Eleanor's demands were met while maintaining the calm necessary to keep all elements working together. She had changed into the formal black uniform required for serving staff, her hair neatly pinned back. As the clock struck 4, a sleek black town car pulled into the circular driveway. Jeffrey Winston had arrived for his sound check, 45 minutes earlier than scheduled. He's here. Eleanor gasped, her composure momentarily shattered. Richard isn't even back from the office yet. Sylvia, show Mr. Winston to the library while I call Richard. Make sure he has everything he needs. Sylvia met the renowned pianist at the door, a tall, austere man with silver-streaked hair and an impassive expression. Mr. Winston, welcome to the Mansfield residence. I'm Sylvia. If you'll follow me, we've prepared the library for you to relax before your performance. Winston nodded curtly, following her through the mansion without comment, his sharp eyes taking in the opulent surroundings. In the library, Sylvia showed him the refreshments prepared according to his management's detailed requirements. Mrs. Mansfield will join you shortly, she informed him. Is there anything else you require before your sound check? Winston finally spoke, his voice surprisingly warm compared to his demeanor. I'd like to see the piano now, if possible. I prefer a longer acquaintance with my instruments. Of course, sir. This way. In the grand salon, Winston approached the Steinway with the reverence of a devotee. He circled it slowly, examining it from every angle before sitting at the bench. His fingers hovered over the keys momentarily, then descended to play a complex series of chords. He frowned slightly. The B-flat in the second octave still feels a bit sticky. Did the technician address this? Sylvia hesitated. He did work on several keys, sir. I can call him back if... No need, Winston interrupted. I can manage it. But someone should dust the keys again before I play tonight. There's a slight film. I'll take care of it immediately, Sylvia assured him. As Winston returned to the library, Eleanor rushed in, breathless and flustered. Was that him playing? How did he seem? Was everything to his liking? He mentioned the B-flat key feels slightly sticky, and the keys need dusting before tonight, Sylvia reported. Eleanor's expression tightened. Then take care of it, Sylvia. Now. This must be perfect. Left alone with the magnificent instrument, Sylvia retrieved her special cleaning supplies. With practiced motions, she carefully dusted each key, working from left to right. When she reached the problematic B-flat, she pressed it gently, testing its response. It was indeed slightly resistant. Without thinking, her trained musician's instinct took over. She played a soft chord progression, testing the key in context, her fingers moving with professional precision across the keyboard. What do you think you're doing? Eleanor's voice cracked through the room like ice breaking. Sylvia's hands jerked away from the keys as if burned. Mrs. Mansfield, I was just checking the B-flat key that Mr. Winston mentioned. You were playing my piano, Eleanor's voice rose dangerously. My grandmother's Steinway. With your hands that have been cleaning toilets all day. Sylvia stood frozen as Eleanor's words echoed through the grand salon. Several staff members had paused in their tasks, watching the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions. I apologize, Mrs. Mansfield, Sylvia said evenly, though her heart pounded in her chest. I was only checking the key Mr. Winston mentioned was sticking. By playing it? Eleanor's voice dripped with incredulity. Do you honestly expect me to believe that you, a housekeeper, know anything about concert pianos? Her laugh was sharp and dismissive. Next you'll tell me you were composing a symphony while mopping the floors. From the doorway came a deep, calm voice. Actually, checking a sticky key by playing it in context is exactly what a knowledgeable pianist would do. Geoffrey Winston stepped into the room, his commanding presence immediately shifting the dynamic. Eleanor's expression flickered between embarrassment and indignation. Mr. Winston. I was just explaining to our housekeeper that my grandmother's piano requires expert handling. Eleanor's tone transformed instantly to honeyed deference. Indeed, Winston replied, his gaze fixed on Sylvia with new interest. Those were Chopin's chord progressions you were playing, weren't they? From his nocturne in E-flat major. Sylvia nodded slightly, her composure maintained despite the public humiliation. Yes, sir. It's an effective sequence for testing key response across the middle register. Eleanor's eyes widened, darting between her esteemed guest and her maid. I'm sure Sylvia was just repeating something she's heard me play, she said with a tight smile. Winston's eyebrow raised slightly. Perhaps. He approached the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys. This B-flat does have a slight resistance. Your housekeeper has a good ear to notice it. The salon had grown increasingly crowded as guests began to arrive early. Richard Mansfield appeared at his wife's side, sensing tension but unaware of its cause. Geoffrey. So glad you could make it. I see you've met our staff already, Richard extended his hand warmly. Indeed, Winston replied, shaking Richard's hand while his gaze remained thoughtfully on Sylvia, who had stepped back to a respectful distance, her face carefully composed. Your housekeeper seems to have quite an understanding of pianos. Eleanor laughed, the sound brittle. Sylvia was just overstepping her duties. She should be helping in the kitchen now, actually. The dismissal was clear. Before she goes, Winston said, his tone light but with an unmistakable undercurrent of challenge, I'd be curious to hear her play properly. A hush fell over the gathering guests. Eleanor's smile froze on her face. That's hardly appropriate, she managed, her voice strained. Sylvia has duties to attend to, and I'm sure our guests don't want to be entertained by the help. On the contrary, came a voice from the crowd. Charlotte Whitmore, Eleanor's social rival, stepped forward with gleaming interest. I find the idea charming. Rather like those talent shows where unexpected performers surprise everyone. Eleanor's jaw tightened, trapped between her desire to dismiss Sylvia and her unwillingness to contradict both her honored performer and her social peer. Richard, sensing his wife's distress but misreading its cause, tried to smooth the situation. If Mr. Winston is interested, perhaps a brief demonstration wouldn't hurt. Sylvia, would you mind? All eyes turned to Sylvia, who stood perfectly still, caught in a moment that seemed both impossible and inevitable. Playing would likely cost her this job, regardless of her skill level. Not playing would confirm Eleanor's dismissive assessment. I couldn't possibly, Sylvia began, her voice quiet but dignified. I insist, Winston said, stepping away from the piano with a gracious gesture. As a professional courtesy to a fellow musician. His emphasis on the word professional was subtle but unmistakable. Eleanor's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This is ridiculous. She's a housekeeper, not a concert pianist. Then you have nothing to worry about, Winston replied mildly. If she plays poorly, we'll have a laugh and move on. If she plays well. He shrugged, leaving the implication hanging in the air. The gathered crowd, now sensing drama beyond the planned entertainment, waited with collective anticipation. Eleanor, cornered by social expectations, gave a tight nod. Very well. One piece, Sylvia. Make it brief. With all eyes upon her, Sylvia approached the piano, her heart thundering in her chest. 20 years since she played on an instrument of this caliber. 20 years of dreams deferred, of practicing on her worn upright after long days of cleaning other people's homes. As she sat at the bench, adjusting it with the automatic movements of a trained performer, Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. Do remember that this is a Steinway, Sylvia. Perhaps the chopsticks is more your speed than Chopin. Scattered nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Sylvia's hands hovered over the keys for a moment, steady despite the eyes upon her. Then, with a deep breath, she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the salon, silencing every whisper, every shuffling foot. Sylvia's fingers moved across the keys with the assurance of someone returning home after a long absence, each note ringing with crystalline clarity through the perfect acoustics of the room. Eleanor's smug smile froze, then slowly faded as the complexity of the piece revealed itself. This was no simple tune learned by ear or basic piano exercise. The ballade demanded technical mastery, emotional depth, and years of classical training, all of which Sylvia displayed with quiet confidence. Geoffrey Winston stood near the piano, his expert eye catching every nuance of Sylvia's technique. His initial expression of curiosity transformed into one of genuine respect as she navigated the piece's challenging middle section, her strong hands handling the difficult cross rhythms with precision that spoke of rigorous training. As the music swelled toward its dramatic climax, Sylvia seemed to forget her audience entirely. Her body swayed slightly with the emotional current of the music, her face transformed by complete immersion in Chopin's masterpiece. This was not a housekeeper playing at being a musician, this was an artist reclaiming her voice after years of silence. The guests stood transfixed. Charlotte Whitmore whispered audibly to her husband, "That's Juilliard-level playing, at minimum." Richard Mansfield watched with open amazement, while Eleanor stood rigid, her champagne glass gripped so tightly it threatened to shatter in her manicured hand. When Sylvia reached the thunderous final passage, her technical brilliance matched the emotional intensity she brought to the piece. Her fingers flew across the keys in perfect control, building to the powerful conclusion that left the final chord resonating through the suddenly breathless room. For 3 heartbeats, complete silence held the salon in its grip. Then Geoffrey Winston began to applaud, the sharp sound of his hands coming together breaking the spell. The room erupted in enthusiastic applause, with several guests rising to their feet in spontaneous standing ovation. Extraordinary, Winston said, approaching Sylvia as she rose modestly from the bench. Absolutely extraordinary. You've studied professionally, clearly. Before Sylvia could respond, Eleanor stepped forward, her social mask firmly back in place though considerably strained at the edges. What a charming surprise, she said, her voice brittle with forced lightness. Sylvia, I had no idea you played. You should have mentioned it during your interview. You never asked, Mrs. Mansfield, Sylvia replied simply, her dignity intact despite the undercurrent of tension. Winston turned to Eleanor with raised eyebrows. You have a Juilliard-trained pianist dusting your furniture, Mrs. Mansfield. That's rather like using a Stradivarius to prop open a door. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the guests. Eleanor's smile tightened further. Juilliard? Surely you're mistaken, she said, though uncertainty had crept into her voice. I recognize the training, Winston replied confidently. The Fleischer influence in the phrasing is unmistakable. He turned back to Sylvia. You studied with him, didn't you? Sylvia nodded once, her composure perfect despite the surreal situation. For a year and a half, yes. Charlotte Whitmore stepped forward, her social predator's instinct sensing Eleanor's discomfort. How fascinating. Tell us more, Sylvia. Why aren't you performing professionally with talent like that? Before Sylvia could answer, Richard Mansfield, ever the practical businessman, intervened. I think we've imposed enough on Sylvia for one evening. She has other responsibilities for our party. He gave Sylvia a respectful nod. Thank you for the beautiful performance. It was truly unexpected and wonderful. Recognizing the lifeline, Sylvia inclined her head graciously. Thank you, Mr. Mansfield. If you'll excuse me, I should check on dinner preparations. As she moved to leave, Geoffrey Winston spoke again. I look forward to discussing music with you later, Ms. Jackson. Perhaps after my own performance, which I must say has suddenly become rather intimidating. This broke the tension with genuine laughter, allowing Sylvia to slip away with dignity intact while conversation resumed among the guests. As she retreated to the kitchen, she could feel Eleanor's gaze burning into her back, and knew with certainty that regardless of the guests' admiration, her time in the Mansfield household had just been significantly shortened. Dinner proceeded with the superficial perfection Eleanor had planned for months. 8 immaculate courses were served by silent staff, the string quartet played unobtrusively in the corner, and conversation flowed along with expensive wine. Yet an undercurrent of electricity ran through the gathering, with frequent glances toward the kitchen doors whenever Sylvia appeared to oversee service. Eleanor maintained her composure with brittle determination, deflecting questions about her maid's unexpected talent with practiced social grace. Such a surprise to us all, she repeated whenever the subject arose. Now, Charlotte, you must tell everyone about your recent trip to Milan. In the kitchen, Sylvia directed the catering staff with the same quiet efficiency she always displayed, giving no indication that anything unusual had transpired. Only the occasional trembling of her hands as she arranged dessert plates betrayed her inner tumult. Is it true, whispered Maria, one of the temporary serving staff. Were you really at Juilliard? Sylvia's eyes flicked up briefly. Focus on the soufflés, please. They need to be served immediately. After dinner, guests returned to the salon where Geoffrey Winston was to perform. The crowd's anticipation had shifted, they had come expecting excellence from the renowned pianist, but now they were equally curious about how his performance would compare to their unexpected aperitif. Winston approached the piano with a respectful nod toward Sylvia, who stood at attention near the kitchen entrance, supervising the coffee service. Before I begin, he addressed the gathering, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm playing following a revelatory performance by Ms. Jackson. Music is not a competition, but a conversation across time and experience, and I'm honored to continue the dialogue she so beautifully began. Eleanor's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips, her expression caught between social obligation and private fury. Richard placed a steadying hand on her arm, his businessman's instinct for damage control fully engaged. Winston's performance was masterful, as expected from a musician of his caliber. Yet throughout his recital, guests continued to steal glances at Sylvia, the comparison inevitable. When he finished to enthusiastic applause, Winston beckoned Sylvia forward. Ms. Jackson, I wonder if you might join me for a duet. Schubert's Fantasia in F minor is meant for 4 hands, and I believe you know it. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Eleanor began to rise, clearly intending to intervene, but Richard's hand tightened on her arm. Not now, Ellie, he murmured. You'll only make it worse. Sylvia hesitated, the weight of 20 years of sacrificed dreams pressing against professional boundaries she had carefully maintained. Then, with quiet dignity, she approached the piano. Their performance was electric, two masters engaged in musical conversation, anticipating each other's interpretive choices with uncanny sensitivity. When they finished, the applause was thunderous, with guests rising in a unanimous standing ovation. "Where have you been hiding?" Winston asked Sylvia directly, a question the entire room clearly shared. "Raising my son," she answered simply. "Supporting my family." The party continued late into the night, with Sylvia returning to her duties immediately after the duet. But the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Guests who had previously looked through her now acknowledged her with respectful nods. Several slipped business cards into her hand with whispered invitations to discuss opportunities. By 2 a.m, when the last guests departed, Eleanor's perfect composure had frayed visibly at the edges. As Richard bid farewell to the Whitmores at the door, she finally confronted Sylvia in the empty salon. "You humiliated me in my own home," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Sylvia continued gathering used napkins, her movements steady. "That wasn't my intention, Mrs. Mansfield. You should have told me you played. You deliberately misled me during your interview. You asked if I had experience with household maintenance and domestic service. I do." Sylvia met Eleanor's gaze directly. "You never asked about my education or previous career aspirations." "You're fired," Eleanor said flatly. "I want you gone by tomorrow afternoon." Richard, entering the room in time to hear his wife's declaration, stepped forward. "Eleanor, think about what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Eleanor snapped. "I won't have an employee who makes a fool of me in front of our entire social circle." "Sylvia didn't make a fool of you," Richard countered, his tone reasonable. "Your reaction to her talent might, however." Eleanor turned to him, speechless with shock at his contradiction. Sylvia carefully placed the linens in her service cart. "I understand, Mrs. Mansfield. I'll return tomorrow to collect my final paycheck." Her dignity remained intact even as her employment terminated. As she turned to leave, Geoffrey Winston appeared in the doorway, apparently having returned for a forgotten item. "Ah, perfect timing," he said, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Ms. Jackson, I've been speaking with the director of the Community Music Project. They're desperately seeking a piano instructor with your caliber of training. The pay is likely better than domestic service, with far more appropriate recognition of your skills." He handed her a business card. "Call Jerome tomorrow. He's expecting to hear from you." Eleanor's face flushed with complicated emotions, embarrassment, anger, and something less easily defined. Sylvia accepted the card with a gracious nod. "Thank you, Mr. Winston. I appreciate your kindness." Then, turning to Eleanor and Richard, she added, "Good night, Mr. and Mrs. Mansfield. Congratulations on your anniversary." With that, she wheeled her cart toward the kitchen, leaving 3 very different people watching her departure, Winston with admiration, Richard with troubled thoughtfulness, and Eleanor with the dawning realization that her perfect social triumph had transformed into something entirely unexpected. The morning after the party, Eleanor sat alone in her bathrobe at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of coffee and a throbbing headache. The house was eerily quiet after yesterday's chaos. All evidence of the celebration had been cleared away by the cleaning crew that had arrived at dawn. All evidence except the conversations she couldn't unhear, the looks she couldn't unsee. Imagine not even knowing your own maid was a concert pianist, Charlotte Whitmore had stage whispered to another guest, loud enough to ensure Eleanor overheard. What else doesn't she notice about the people right under her nose? Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message from Richard, "Meeting running late. Speak to you this evening about Sylvia situation." The Sylvia situation. As if her maid's hidden talent and their public humiliation could be neatly categorized as a business problem to solve. Eleanor tossed the phone aside and moved to the salon, drawn inexorably to the piano that had been the catalyst for yesterday's disaster. She sat at the bench, placing her fingers on the keys without pressing them. When was the last time she had actually played? Years, certainly. She had maintained the fiction of being a pianist, the magnificent Steinway, the carefully selected sheet music displayed on the rack, without engaging with the reality. With sudden determination, she pressed down on the keys, attempting a simple Chopin prelude she had once known by heart. Her fingers fumbled the passage, the notes coming out halting and discordant. After a few painful measures, she stopped, her hands falling to her lap. Mrs. Mansfield? Eleanor startled, turning to find Rosa, one of the regular cleaning staff, standing uncertainly in the doorway. Sylvia asked me to give you this, Rosa said, extending an envelope. She said she won't be coming in today as planned, since yesterday. Eleanor took the envelope, dismissing Rosa with a nod. Inside was a neatly handwritten note. Mrs. Mansfield, I apologize for any embarrassment caused at your anniversary celebration. Enclosed is my key to your home. As requested, I will not return to the premises. My final paycheck can be mailed to my address on file. Respectfully, Sylvia Jackson. Formal, dignified, giving no hint of the extraordinary talent that had stunned their guests. Something about the restraint in those few lines pricked at Eleanor's conscience in a way that her husband's disapproval had not. She found herself at her computer, typing Sylvia Jackson pianist into the search bar before she could reconsider. The results were sparse but illuminating. A 25-year-old newspaper article about promising scholarship students at Juilliard, featuring a young Sylvia at the piano, a brief mention in a review of a student recital, noting her exceptional interpretive maturity, then nothing for years until a handful of programs from community concerts where she had accompanied local choirs. The talented young woman in those early articles had disappeared, her promising career apparently abandoned. Eleanor frowned, searching further until she found a small obituary notice from 23 years ago, Thomas Jackson, survived by his wife Marie and daughter Sylvia. The dates aligned with Sylvia's unexplained departure from Juilliard. Eleanor sat back, an uncomfortable feeling settling in her stomach. For 3 years, Sylvia had worked in her home, cleaning her floors, serving her guests, tending to her needs, all while carrying this history, this talent, this truncated dream. She never said anything, Eleanor murmured to the empty room, but even as the words left her mouth, she recognized their hollowness. Why would Sylvia have shared such personal information? When had Eleanor ever expressed interest in her maid's life beyond her ability to fulfill her duties? Her phone rang, Charlotte Whitmore's name flashing on the screen. Eleanor let it go to voicemail, knowing exactly what her social rival wanted: details, gossip, the opportunity to probe the embarrassing revelation that Eleanor Mansfield's maid was more cultured and talented than Eleanor herself. Instead, Eleanor found herself searching for Jeffrey Winston's contact information. His agent answered, initially hesitant until Eleanor mentioned Sylvia's name. Ah, yes. Quite a discovery, the agent said, his tone warming. Jeffrey was quite impressed. He's already spoken with Jerome at the Community Music Project about her. I need to know more about her background, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the request. Her training, her career. Why she's working as a housekeeper instead of a performer. There was a pause. That seems rather personal, Mrs. Mansfield. Perhaps you should ask her directly. The gentle rebuke stung, especially coming from someone who would normally be eager to please a wealthy potential patron. Eleanor thanked him curtly and ended the call, her restlessness growing. Before she could second-guess herself, she was in her car, navigating to the address listed in Sylvia's employee file, a modest apartment complex across town, in a neighborhood Eleanor had never had reason to visit. She sat in the parking lot for several minutes, gathering her courage for a confrontation she hadn't planned and couldn't quite justify. As she approached the building, she noticed a tall young man exiting, carrying a backpack and textbooks. Something in his bearing, the shape of his eyes, reminded her of Sylvia. "Excuse me," she called. "Are you Marcus? Sylvia Jackson's son?" He turned, wariness immediately filling his expression. "Yes. And you're Mrs. Mansfield?" Not a question. He knew exactly who she was, had probably heard stories about the demanding woman his mother worked for. Eleanor felt strangely exposed. Is your mother home? I'd like to speak with her. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Why? So you can insult her again in private instead of in front of an audience. Eleanor flinched at the direct attack. I deserve that, she admitted, surprising them both with her candor. But no. I want to understand. Something in her tone must have convinced him. Marcus hesitated, then nodded toward the building. Apartment 2B. She's home. He paused. She was up all night helping me with my scholarship application. For music composition. Not that you asked. As he walked away, Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, absorbing this new piece of information like a physical blow. Then, squaring her shoulders, she approached the building to confront the woman whose hidden depths had shattered her carefully constructed social facade, and perhaps, though she wasn't ready to admit it yet, her understanding of herself. Sylvia opened her door to find Eleanor Mansfield standing in her hallway, looking as out of place as a peacock in a parking garage. Her designer purse alone probably cost 3 months of Sylvia's rent. Mrs. Mansfield, Sylvia said, her surprise contained behind the professional mask she'd perfected over years of service. This is unexpected. Eleanor's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. Standing in this modest apartment doorway, she felt suddenly and uncomfortably aware of the vast difference in their circumstances, a difference that had never troubled her until she discovered that the woman who cleaned her toilets could play Chopin with the skill of a concert pianist. May I come in? She asked, her usual imperious tone softened by uncertainty. After a brief hesitation, Sylvia stepped aside. Of course. Eleanor entered, her eyes immediately drawn to the upright piano in the corner of the small living room, sheet music neatly stacked beside it. The apartment was immaculate but obviously worn, furniture that had been carefully maintained for years, walls that needed fresh paint, windows dressed with simple curtains rather than the custom drapes that hung in Eleanor's home. I met your son outside, Eleanor said, searching for a way to begin. Marcus. Yes, he mentioned. Sylvia remained standing, making no move to offer Eleanor a seat. The subtle power shift wasn't lost on either woman. He said he's applying for a music scholarship. Composition? Sylvia nodded, her expression guarded. He's very talented. More than I ever was. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke, the words rushing out before she could reconsider. Why didn't you tell me? About Juilliard, your training. All these years, you've been hiding this extraordinary part of yourself. Sylvia's eyebrows rose slightly. It wasn't relevant to dusting your shelves or polishing your silver, Mrs. Mansfield. The gentle rebuke landed with precision. Eleanor flushed, but pressed on. I looked you up. You were considered promising. There were reviews, articles. Then nothing after your father died. Something flickered in Sylvia's eyes, surprise, perhaps, that Eleanor had bothered to research her past. My father's medical bills were substantial. My mother couldn't manage alone. I had choices to make. But to give up music entirely? To become a... Eleanor stopped herself, suddenly aware of the condescension about to escape her lips. A maid? Sylvia finished for her, her dignity intact. I never gave up music, Mrs. Mansfield. I simply changed how it fit into my life. She gestured toward the piano. I teach a few students. I play at church. I accompanied my son as he developed his own talent. Eleanor moved to the window, struggling to articulate the confusing mix of emotions that had driven her to this unexpected visit. I feel like a fool, she finally admitted. Not just because everyone at the party saw that I didn't know about your talent, but because I never bothered to ask. 3 years, and I know nothing about you except that you're efficient and punctual. Sylvia's expression softened slightly. Why would you? I was providing a service, not friendship. Is that how it has to be? Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the question. This rigid division between service and humanity. For the first time, Sylvia seemed genuinely startled. She studied Eleanor's face, looking for signs of insincerity but finding only uncomfortable self-recognition. "Please, sit down," Sylvia finally said, gesturing to the modest couch. As Eleanor perched on the edge of the cushion, Sylvia continued, "Would you like some tea? I was about to make some for myself." The normality of the offer, so different from their usual interactions where Sylvia was always the one providing refreshments, created a strange new dynamic between them. Eleanor nodded, watching as Sylvia moved efficiently around her small kitchen, the same practiced movements she'd witnessed countless times in her own home. "You could have been performing," Eleanor said as Sylvia handed her a simple mug of tea. "Instead of cleaning houses." "Perhaps," Sylvia acknowledged, taking a seat in the armchair opposite. "But my son has food, shelter, education, and the chance to pursue his dreams without the interruptions I faced. I've had a successful life, Mrs. Mansfield, just not the one I originally planned." Eleanor sipped her tea, buying time as she digested this perspective, so different from her own measure of success through acquisition and social standing. "Jeffrey Winston connected you with the community music project," she said finally. "Will you take the position?" "I'm considering it. The salary is better than domestic work, and the hours would allow me to be home when Marcus returns from classes." Sylvia paused. "I would have given you proper notice, Mrs. Mansfield. I wouldn't have left you without help, despite how things ended yesterday." The quiet dignity in those words made Eleanor's cheeks burn with shame. "I behaved terribly," she admitted. "Richard was right, you didn't embarrass me. My reaction did." Sylvia accepted this closest approximation of an apology with a slight nod. "We all have moments we'd rather forget." An unexpected laugh escaped Eleanor. "I've spent 15 years cultivating the perfect image, the perfect home, the perfect social standing. And in one evening, I discovered that my maid has more natural grace under pressure than I could ever hope to achieve." "That's not true," Sylvia said, surprising Eleanor with her defense. "You've built exactly the life you wanted. There's skill in that too." Eleanor considered this, turning the mug in her hands. "Is it really the life I wanted, though? Or just the one I thought I should want?" She glanced at the piano. "I used to play, you know. Not nearly at your level, but I enjoyed it." Somewhere along the way, the piano became a status symbol rather than an instrument. Something shifted in Sylvia's expression, a softening, a recognition. It's never too late to find your way back to something you loved. The conversation paused as Eleanor noticed a stack of papers on the coffee table, sheet music with handwritten notations, next to what appeared to be an application form. "Is that Marcus's scholarship submission?" she asked. Sylvia nodded. "Due tomorrow. He's been working on it for months." An idea began to form in Eleanor's mind, a way to make amends that went beyond awkward apologies. "Richard serves on several arts foundation boards," she said carefully. "He knows people at the conservatory." Sylvia stiffened immediately. "Marcus wants to earn his opportunities on his own merit." "Of course," Eleanor backtracked quickly. "I wasn't suggesting. I only meant." She took a breath, recalibrating. "What if there was a way we could help without undermining his efforts? Not pulling strings, but perhaps creating opportunities for his work to be fairly evaluated?" Sylvia studied her for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question, one Eleanor wasn't entirely sure she could answer. "Because I was wrong," she said finally. "About you. About what matters. I'd like to try to make it right." For the first time since Eleanor had arrived, Sylvia smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "That's a bridge worth building, Mrs. Mansfield." "Eleanor," she corrected, offering her hand across the coffee table. "I think, after everything, you should call me Eleanor." Sylvia hesitated only briefly before taking the offered hand. "Eleanor, then." As their hands clasped across the divide of social status and privilege, both women recognized the fragile beginning of something unexpected, not quite friendship, not yet, but a human connection that transcended their previous roles of employer and employee. A bridge, as Sylvia had called it, spanning differences that had once seemed impassable. 2 weeks later, Eleanor sat in the back row of a small recital hall at the Community Music Project, watching as Sylvia conducted a master class for intermediate piano students. The transformation was remarkable. The woman who had moved invisibly through Eleanor's home now commanded the room with quiet authority, her passion for music evident in every gesture and instruction. "Listen to how the melody breathes here," Sylvia was saying, demonstrating a passage that had been giving a young girl trouble. "Music isn't just about playing the right notes, it's about finding the voice within them." Eleanor found herself leaning forward, as captivated as the students. When the class ended, she waited while parents collected their children, watching as several stopped to speak with Sylvia, their respect evident in their body language. "You're a natural teacher," Eleanor commented as they walked together toward the parking lot afterward. Their weekly coffee meetings had become an unexpected ritual, awkward at first, gradually warming into something approaching friendship. "I enjoy it," Sylvia admitted. "It's different from performing, but there's something deeply satisfying about helping others find their musical voice." She hesitated. "I have you to thank for this opportunity, in a way. If you hadn't caught me at your piano that day." Eleanor laughed, the memory no longer carrying the sting it once had. "I believe Jeffrey Winston deserves that credit. I was hardly supportive." "But you are now," Sylvia pointed out as they reached Eleanor's car. "Speaking of which, how did Richard's conversation with Dean Harris go?" Eleanor smiled. "The conservatory is very interested in establishing a scholarship for promising composers from underprivileged backgrounds. Richard has pledged the initial funding." She paused. "It's not specifically for Marcus, of course. But when he applies, he'll be considered fairly, on his own merits," Sylvia finished, her expression grateful but firm. "That's all I've ever wanted for him." Eleanor nodded, understanding now the pride that had prevented Sylvia from sharing her musical background during her employment, the same pride that made her resist any hint of special treatment for her son, despite the obstacles he faced. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said, changing the subject. "About the piano. Your grandmother's Steinway. What about it?" "It sits in my salon, largely unused except as decoration. Meanwhile, you're teaching on that upright in your apartment, and the community project has that terrible old Yamaha with the cracked soundboard." Eleanor took a breath. "What if the Steinway came here? As a donation. Something that would actually be played, appreciated for what it is rather than what it represents." Sylvia's eyes widened. "Eleanor, that piano is worth—" "I know exactly what it's worth," Eleanor interrupted gently. "That's why it should be somewhere it can be truly valued for its purpose, not just its price tag." A complex series of emotions crossed Sylvia's face. "What about your grandmother's legacy?" "I think she'd prefer knowing her piano was being played by talented hands rather than serving as an expensive dust gatherer." Eleanor smiled wryly. "Besides, Richard has already agreed. Says it's a tax write-off." Sylvia laughed at that, a free, genuine sound that still surprised Eleanor whenever she heard it. Their relationship had evolved into something neither woman could have predicted, bridging worlds that had seemed irreconcilably separate just weeks ago. "There's something else," Eleanor continued, suddenly serious. "The community project needs administrative help, someone to coordinate programs, handle logistics, fundraising. I've been looking for meaningful volunteer work, something more substantial than chairing charity galas." "You want to volunteer here?" Sylvia couldn't hide her surprise. "If you think I'd be suitable," Eleanor replied, an unfamiliar note of uncertainty in her voice. "I have organizational skills, social connections that could help with fundraising. I could learn the rest." Sylvia studied her former employer thoughtfully. It would mean working alongside people from very different backgrounds. Taking direction rather than giving it, sometimes. "I know," Eleanor acknowledged. "I have a lot to learn. About music, about working with communities I've never really engaged with, about—" She gestured vaguely, "all of it. But I'd like to try." The request, not a demand, but a genuine petition for Sylvia's guidance, represented how far Eleanor had come from the woman who had once fired her maid in a fit of embarrassed pride. "I think that could work," Sylvia said finally, a smile warming her features. "But you'll need to start from the beginning, the way all of us did." "I would expect nothing less," Eleanor replied, and meant it. As they parted ways, Sylvia to teach her next class, Eleanor to meet with the project's director about her potential role, both women recognized the strange symmetry of their new arrangement. The employer had become the student, the maid had become the mentor. The piano that had once divided them now offered a bridge between their worlds, creating harmony from what had once been discord. In her car, Eleanor paused before starting the engine, watching through the window as Sylvia greeted her next student with warm professionalism. The woman she had once valued only for her ability to polish silver now commanded her genuine respect, not despite her background and choices, but because of the grace and dignity with which she had navigated them. It was a humbling realization, but also a liberating one. In recognizing Sylvia's worth beyond her service, Eleanor had begun to rediscover her own beyond the trappings of wealth and status she had so carefully cultivated. The music that had once been merely decorative in her life might yet become transformative, if she were brave enough to truly listen. The Community Music Center's annual showcase filled the renovated theater to capacity. In the front row, Eleanor sat beside Richard, program in hand, watching as Sylvia adjusted the microphone at center stage. "Welcome, everyone, to our celebration of music and community," Sylvia began, her voice confident and warm. "1 year ago, our program served 30 students. Today, we reach over 200 from across the city, regardless of their ability to pay." Applause rippled through the audience. Eleanor smiled, remembering the countless grant applications she'd written, the fundraising calls she'd made, the spreadsheets she'd managed to help make this expansion possible. Her volunteer position had gradually evolved into a paid role as development director, work that challenged and fulfilled her in ways her social calendar never had. "Tonight's performance features students of all ages and backgrounds," Sylvia continued. "Each bringing their unique voice to our shared musical conversation. And I'm particularly proud to announce that 5 of our graduating seniors have received conservatory scholarships, including our featured composer this evening." More applause as Marcus Jackson stepped forward to join his mother on stage, tall and poised in his first formal suit, a gift from Richard, who had taken a particular interest in the young man's development over the past year. "We'll conclude tonight's program with the premiere of an original composition," Sylvia announced, maternal pride evident in her voice despite her professional demeanor. "But first, I'd like to recognize someone whose contribution to our program goes far beyond financial support." Eleanor tensed, recognizing the lead-in. She had specifically asked not to be publicly acknowledged, uncomfortable with being praised for work that felt more like atonement than charity. "Eleanor Mansfield joined us as a volunteer administrator last year, despite having no background in community arts programming," Sylvia was saying. "She has since become essential to our organization, securing grants, coordinating volunteers, and even," Sylvia smiled, "taking piano lessons herself." Gentle laughter rippled through the audience as Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. Her weekly lessons, stumbling through basics she'd long forgotten, her fingers stiff from years of disuse, had become a humbling but joyful ritual. She also donated the magnificent Steinway that our advanced students have enjoyed this year. "Eleanor, would you please stand and be recognized?" Reluctantly, Eleanor rose, accepting the applause with a nod before quickly resuming her seat. Richard squeezed her hand, understanding her discomfort with the spotlight in this context. "Proud of you," he whispered. The program proceeded through performances of varying skill levels, each met with enthusiastic support. Eleanor watched Sylvia move between roles, introducing students, adjusting the piano bench for younger performers, nodding encouragement from the wings. The woman she had once seen only as the help now revealed the depth of her gifts as educator, musician, and community builder. Finally, Marcus took the stage again, standing beside the Steinway, Eleanor's grandmother's piano, now serving a purpose far nobler than status decoration. "My composition is called Bridges," he announced, his voice steady. "It's dedicated to my mother, who taught me that music can span the distances between people, between dreams and reality, between the past we've lived and the future we create." As he played his complex, moving composition, Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. The music spoke eloquently of struggle, perseverance, and ultimately, connection, themes that resonated deeply with her own unexpected journey this past year. When the final note faded, the audience rose in standing ovation. Sylvia joined her son on stage, her proud embrace capturing everything words couldn't express. Eleanor applauded until her hands hurt, Richard steady beside her. At the reception afterward, Eleanor found herself serving punch alongside Charlotte Whitmore, whose daughter had recently joined the beginner violin program. "I hardly recognized you at first," Charlotte commented, her tone somewhere between impressed and confused. "You seem different." Eleanor smiled, secure enough now to find amusement rather than offense in the observation. "I am different. Turns out there's more to life than having the most impressive anniversary party in town." Before Charlotte could respond, Sylvia approached, elegant in her simple concert black. "Eleanor, there's someone I'd like you to meet, the director from the East Side Arts Initiative. They're interested in possibly replicating our program model." "Excuse me, Charlotte," Eleanor said politely, following Sylvia through the crowd. As they walked, Sylvia leaned closer. "Rescued you from Charlotte's interrogation," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "Some bridges might take a bit longer to build." Eleanor laughed. "Some chasms might be too wide. But thank you." She paused. "For everything, actually. This past year has been transformative." Sylvia's expression grew serious. "For both of us, I think. You gave me back something I'd set aside for too long. A public voice." "You had it all along," Eleanor countered. "I just had to learn to listen." They reached the theater lobby, where Marcus stood surrounded by well-wishers. Seeing his mother, he broke away to join them, his face alight with the electricity of his successful debut. "Mrs. Mansfield," he greeted Eleanor warmly. "What did you think?" "I think conservatories will be competing for you," she replied honestly. "It was beautiful, Marcus. Truly." "Mom says you're taking lessons now," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Maybe you'll perform in next year's showcase." Eleanor laughed, genuinely amused by the suggestion. "I think I'll leave the performing to the talented people. I'm better behind the scenes." "You never know," Sylvia said with gentle encouragement. "Music has a way of changing our perception of what's possible." Looking between these two people who had shifted the axis of her carefully ordered world, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness that all her previous social triumphs had never provided. The simple piano she had begun playing, not to impress others but to connect with something authentic within herself, had indeed changed her perception of what was possible. Not just in music, but in human connection across the artificial boundaries of class and status. "To what's possible, then," Eleanor said, raising her punch cup in a small toast. Sylvia and Marcus joined the gesture, their cups touching lightly. Three people from different worlds, connected now by bridges built of respect, understanding, and the universal language of music, a harmony far more complex and beautiful than Eleanor could ever have imagined when she had caught her maid touching her piano just 1 year before. "To what's possible," they echoed together, as the sounds of celebration continued around them, music of a different kind but no less profound. Dear friend, this story reminds us that extraordinary talent and dignity exist in every walk of life, often hidden behind the labels we hastily assign to others. The most meaningful connections happen when we look beyond surface judgments and recognize the humanity we share. Every person you encounter has a story, has dreams, has value that can't be measured by their job title or social status. Let's challenge ourselves to see beyond these artificial divisions in our own lives. If this message touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to support more content that bridges divides and celebrates our shared humanity. Your engagement helps these important stories reach those who need to hear them most.